Hey guys, Cameron Yates here on this episode of Remodeling America. We're going to go over a project we've already kind of looked at, but it just goes into some detail about some of the things you might run into, the problems you might have whenever you're trying to convert an existing deck or even an existing space into something like a screened porch where you're putting a lot more load on it and relying on levelity, and if that's a word, levelness, and just hoping that other people had done something correct beforehand. Anyway, we'll run you through a couple of those little things and show you some pointers and give you some advice on it. So, hope you enjoy. All right, so on this project, you'll see we've already kind of gone through and done some work, but basically, I'll tell you the things we found. Sometimes we don't even put projects or anything on top of existing decks only because you don't know how they're made, especially older decks. But on newer decks, we'll usually kind of give it a shot. But what we ran into on this deck is a couple things. For one, it was out of level about 1.5 inches, just kind of slid down. I mean, this house isn't even a year old, so sometimes they just go a little bit quicker, especially on these kinds of things. So they just don't put as much attention to the detail. So you really need to check those things out before you begin any of these projects. So we had to completely jack up the deck on this side and then put in all new hangers, new bolts on the back to make it what we needed to make it nice and flat, because we're actually putting another floor on this. Plus we're putting rails and a roof, and you need to really start level. So that was our first thing we found. The second thing we found was the footings that they used. They were about 16 inches deep, which the deeper that you make them, the more water and moisture that these posts absorb. So we try to make them about 4 inches from the surface, just so they're not too deep. Plus we don't put any in concrete, we set them on top of the concrete. But what they did was they actually just layered solid concrete blocks, 4 inches by 8 inches by 16 inch concrete blocks on the ground, and set the posts on that. Technically you can do that. In the code it does say you can do that, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen them slide, I've seen them move, I've seen them sink. So what we did is we excavated them all the way to the blocks and poured our own footings on top of those blocks, so we'd have a nice secure footing, because we had to level the deck out anyway. So we didn't have proper footings, we didn't have a proper level for the deck. It also wasn't bolted in properly. The engineer had wrote a couple of those things in, but always get an engineer's letter for anything that you're going to do, especially on an existing space. I mean, you have to with a roof anyway, at least here in North Carolina. So use your engineer wisely, use your common sense, check, and don't just assume, right? Assume the worst and hope for the best. You know, just assume everything's going to have to be redone. Maybe you even assume you have to tear the deck out, and if you get to keep the deck, then that's a win for everybody. But just kind of keep in mind that just because it's new or because it was a good builder or whatever, you don't necessarily know everything until you actually get that, until you dive into it. So just, keep an eye out for these kinds of things, and don't just expect, sometimes your contractor might come back and say, hey, sorry, this was done, this wasn't done, but just kind of think that there might be some problems along the way. All right, I'll go underneath the deck and I'll show you some things that we had to do. Okay. All right. Luckily, there's plenty of clearance. Just kidding. All right, let's crawl under this deck and show you what we're kind of working on and what we're doing here. So these are some footings that we added as well. So 3 across the middle of this span, and we put a little 2x8 drop girder in here. This is to give us a lot more support. Now, you also have to understand, just because code says something, or honestly, even if engineers say something, they're just telling you what is structurally possible and what's safe, okay? Just because it's safe and structurally possible doesn't mean it doesn't bounce up and down, or maybe it'll crack some tile. I mean, they don't really do enough detail into those kinds of things, okay? So you just got to use a little bit of your common sense and a little bit of expertise. So with 2x8s, we don't ever really use 2x8s to do floor systems. They're just not strong enough, in my opinion. And we're putting tile on this floor, so we want to make sure we have a lot of structure to it. So we went ahead and put in our own 2x8 girder and put in 3 more footings to jack up the center to give it a lot of center support, okay? Because these decks aren't meant to have tile on them, clearly. So we're just doing the best we can to kind of save some materials here, some labor. Now, when we got in here, we saw that there was a fall, okay, to the deck. It was falling down towards this way. So what we've done is we've separated a lot of the joists, these from the band itself. All right, we cut them free and then used the initial little ledger board here to woo some wedges and jack it up to the height that we needed. All right, what we're gonna do is after that, we're gonna take out those wedges and instead put in some joist hangers. We'll also have to piece in and put another piece on top of that band, and then we'll re-put in those bolts and then go from there. Now on this piece here, this piece right here, they had the whole outside of the deck supporting on that, and they didn't have any bolts that went in to support it. So we're also gonna have to add those, but we're also putting a 6x6 on a footing here to have that support. So we'll have both. It'll just be like a double support on that outside edge, which that's something that the engineer wanted. So we had to go underneath this whole thing and do that all the way across, and then we'll put those, leave those bolts in, and then we'll be able to use a lot of this existing wood. This way, I mean, for a couple reasons, right? We don't want to just throw away brand new lumber. It's costly, and even though we do have to alter this a little bit, you know, it's just a little bit more green, trying to save some of the lumber so we're not just tearing it completely out because it is brand new and then starting from scratch. So trying to be a little green, save some space in some landfills, and save the homeowner some money. All right, guys, thanks for watching this video. Hope you learned some tips, a couple little things, and if you liked it, hit the like button, you know, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and you'll get notification every time I come with something new. So again, my name is Cameron Yates, and this is Remodeling America.